What?
What? This is outrageous.
Careful not to choke on your stupidity.
I know. Just hear me out. I'll start out by saying that I was not excited for Obi-Wan Kenobi, like, at all. As much as I wanted to be excited, I've been skeptical pretty much since it was first announced. Many of the recent Star Wars projects have been disappointing or just underwhelming to me, and the marketing didn't do much to suggest that it would be any different this time, so I hadn't even planned on watching it until all the episodes came out. I'd heard some fans say that this strategy made the Book of Boba Fett more enjoyable, so I thought I'd try that this time instead of forcing myself to drag it out week to week. And I am glad that I waited until most of the episodes came out, and that I didn't have to wait for the next one. But not for the reasons I initially thought. Because as it turns out, Obi-Wan Kenobi is actually a really great series. And yes, I'd go so far as to argue that it's the best live-action Star Wars content that we've gotten since Disney purchased Lucasfilm. Granted, I know that's a pretty low bar for some people, but still. So let's quickly review my current opinion on all the other live-action Star Wars that Disney has pumped out. The sequel trilogy, it's not good. I'm sorry, but it's just not. There are parts of each movie that do work, and I have fond memories of seeing them in the theater, so I'll always be grateful for that. But as a whole, this trilogy really missed the mark.
Negative. It didn't go in.
The standalone movies, I've actually come to really like them. Solo is a fun adventure movie despite its flaws, and it doesn't do anything offensively bad. Rogue One has easily become my favorite Disney Star Wars movie, mainly because it's the one that I feel actually adds something meaningful to the existing Star Wars saga. Keep that idea in mind because we'll come back to it later. The Mandalorian, it's a pretty good show, and it certainly has exceptional episodes, but I don't love it the way some Star Wars fans do. And in my opinion, it became too reliant on fan service and style in season 2, rather than having a genuinely good story for its main character. And the Book of Boba Fett,
Like a bantha. Yes?
there is a whole list of reasons why that show failed. So yeah, you can see why it would be hard to get excited for a show about Obi-Wan, a show that, quite frankly, I felt we really didn't need. But I also didn't want to dismiss it out of hand simply because of my bias towards modern Star Wars. My goal was simply to watch it and give as fair and honest an analysis as possible. So while I will be acknowledging that Obi-Wan Kenobi is far from perfect, I hope that by the end of this video I'll have made clear why I came to love it, and why it may just be the best live-action Star Wars in years. With all that said, why don't we just get into it? I said earlier that Rogue One is my favorite Disney Star Wars movie because I feel it actually adds something meaningful to the existing saga. More specifically, I feel that it's a good bridge between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Its visuals are more modern and have a bigger budget like Revenge of the Sith, but they're much closer to the aesthetic of the original trilogy, making it a good transition between the two trilogies. 19 years is also a pretty big gap, so I like seeing them explore the reign of the Empire, the development of the military, how the Rebel Alliance came together, and how it affected different kinds of characters. The sacrifice that these characters make adds a new level of tragedy, but it also makes it even more satisfying when Luke destroys the Death Star in A New Hope, knowing that their sacrifice meant something. This is something that I feel many of the other Disney Star Wars projects have been lacking, but just like Rogue One, perhaps even more so, Obi-Wan Kenobi succeeds in being a meaningful bridge between trilogies. Obi-Wan's character development is fantastic in this show. We meet him at the literal halfway point between his tragic failure in Revenge of the Sith and his more optimistic positivity in A New Hope. Seeing him transition more into that side of his character and work through everything that he went through in the prequel trilogy was very interesting to me. But Ewan McGregor's performance is absolutely what makes all of this work. He is just phenomenal in this series. He puts so much care into the little details. You can see so many different emotions dance across his face in just a few seconds. And if we're talking about that, of course we have to talk about how they develop his relationship between Vader. This was one of the elements I was most skeptical about going in, because if we're being honest, it's not something that really needed to happen, and you do need to suspend your disbelief a little more to believe that these two met between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. So while it may have primarily been told because it's a story that fans wanted to see, I also think that it was a great opportunity for some good character moments and and to expand on Obi-Wan's relationship with Vader specifically, his horror at realizing the monster that his friend has become, what his own failure has led to, how he came to see him as Darth Vader and not Anakin, believing his friend was gone, leading into their confrontation in A New Hope. These were all incredibly interesting ideas to explore, and I'm glad that we got to see them executed with such style. There are plenty of other great examples of how they meaningfully bridge the gap between the trilogies, giving more attention to Leia and even developing a relationship between her and Obi-Wan. I did not expect that at all, and on paper it really sounds like it wouldn't work, but these two were actually one of my favorite aspects of the show. It also gives some new context to A New Hope when you realize that Leia actually knew who Obi-Wan was, and it makes it tragic that she didn't get to see him again. Of course, that also does raise some questions like why Leia didn't eventually tell Luke that she actually knew Obi-Wan, or why she named her child Ben instead of Obi-Wan. I don't know. So yes, in terms of the plot and the overall story of the saga, the films are perfectly fine on their own, but additional stories like Obi-Wan Kenobi allow us to explore these interesting ideas and go more in depth to certain characters that the movies didn't have time for. But while we're on the subject of movies, now's a good time to talk about how the filmmaking is exceptional here. Great directing from Deborah Chow, very smart editing, and stunning visuals that enhance the story being told. Of course, most modern Star Wars projects look good, but this is the first one in a while where the visuals actually managed to move me. One of the best technical aspects of the show is the lightsaber choreography. I know that fan service can have a very negative connotation these days, especially when talking about a franchise like Star Wars, but I honestly feel that the show has some very good fan service, with the lightsaber choreography being an example. The duels are very well done on their own, but some of them feel like they were taken straight out of the prequel trilogy, which is great for people who loved those movies. And getting back to the idea of being a bridge between trilogies, that's also reflected in much of the choreography. It feels like a perfect blend of the original trilogy, the prequels, and even some of the combat that was shown in that flashback in episode 5. I've already gone into how great Ewan McGregor's performance is, but it's worth mentioning again because, again, he does such an amazing job. And there were plenty of scenes where his performance was so good that it honestly made me want to cry. But there were other characters that also got a chance to shine. Reva may have some flaws in her character's writing, but I think that Moses Ingram did a very good job with what she was given to work with, and she did get much better as she went along. I guess her acting is just a little more noticeable when she's alongside a professional like Ewan McGregor. It's also great to see Hayden Christensen back in the role. Now, I had heard people criticizing the show for not utilizing him enough, and I do think that he could have been given a few more scenes, but I think that the second half of the series really made up for it. And sure, you can definitely tell in the flashbacks that he's a 40-year-old man playing his 20-year-old self, but I personally am glad that they didn't try to de-age him or recreate his face with CGI like they have in some of the other shows, because I feel that his performance is a little more natural that way, and I think that he did a really good job. But of course, getting to see him in the Vader suit is also a treat. That final scene with him and Obi-Wan was just handled so perfectly. I loved every second of that. Just another example of how the show was able to enhance and expand upon ideas and characters from the movies. Another issue that many long-running franchises tend to face, and Star Wars has absolutely been guilty of this, is that they tend to lose focus of the central ideas that made the series so special to begin with. But I think the biggest reason that I love Obi-Wan's character arc in this show is because it exemplifies what Star Wars is all about. I think this idea was put best in the novel Revan by Drew Karpyshyn. At the beginning of that book, Revan discusses the general philosophies of both the Sith and the Jedi. Obviously, the Sith rely on negative emotions to enhance their connection to the dark side of the Force, anger, fear, hate, but the Jedi Order tries to avoid emotions and emotional attachments, being more neutral in a sense. However, Revan came to believe that a Jedi could actually use positive emotions such as love and happiness to enhance their connection to the light side of the Force, and that's the part about Obi-Wan's journey in this show that I find the most interesting. You could argue that as a Padawan, Obi-Wan was able to best Darth Maul because of his anger over Qui-Gon's death. And then in the rest of the prequel trilogy, he mainly fought out of his sense of responsibility to both the Jedi Order and the Republic. But by the end of the series, we see that he is now clearly fighting for someone because of his emotional attachment to Leia. It's through his newfound connection to her that he finds the strength to both escape from the rubble and to ultimately defeat Vader in hand-to-hand combat. Admittedly, a lot of the things that we get in Obi-Wan Kenobi are things that we have seen in other Star Wars projects before, but to me, it executed a lot of those things much better because it stayed true to the spirit of what Star Wars is all about. Now, you'd think that this one would be obvious, that it should go for any story or series or trilogy or TV show, but if I had to describe the biggest problem with Disney Star Wars in one word...
Oh, what's that word?
Consistency!
Thanks, losers.
Probably the biggest criticism of the sequel trilogy is that it feels like a tug-of-war between two directors with two very different visions of what Star Wars should be. Both Rogue One and Solo had new directors brought in to do reshoots and to change things from the original vision. The Mandalorian was already a little inconsistent with its quality in season 1, and then it went from being a mostly standalone show to something that referenced fan favorite characters every 5 seconds and felt like it was trying to set up a whole bunch of other spin-offs. And The Mandalorian Season 2.5, I mean the Book of Boba Fett, okay, yeah, let's just call it what it is. It's basically The Mandalorian Season 2.5 because it literally gets hijacked by The Mandalorian for 2 episodes. So I don't know, maybe it's just because Kenobi finally did something that so many other Star Wars projects should have done, but I just appreciate that it feels consistent from beginning to end. Whether you feel he succeeded or not, George Lucas always said that his goal was to make the Star Wars saga feel like one big 12-hour movie, and Obi-Wan really does feel like one big movie. Having one director for each episode means it has a consistent vision, there were no drastic drops in quality between episodes, and all of the payoff that we get at the end of the series was very clearly set up at the beginning. I initially thought that it was odd when it was announced that there were going to be limited one-day screenings of all 6 episodes of Obi-Wan in theaters, but now I kind of wish that they had done that in my area because I may have gone to go see it. Obviously, it's still a TV show first and foremost, but the filmmaking on display and the consistency between episodes really does kind of make it feel like one big movie. But whether or not you agree with that, at the very least, this is one of the most consistent Star Wars projects that we have gotten recently. At the same time, being better than something else isn't enough to call yourself good, so it is important that I acknowledge the problems that I had with this show because there are quite a few. A lot of the dialogue in this series is not that great, and it's especially noticeable to me in episode 2. The show is also filled with plot holes and conveniences, like how did this character figure that out so easily, or doesn't this create a conflict between the movies? There's just a lot of things like that. With all that said, I feel now is a good time to talk about Reva. I do not hate her character. In fact, I feel a lot of the criticisms I had heard about her were just flat out inaccurate. I had heard a lot of people saying that the show was a bait and switch, that it actually felt more like her story instead of Obi-Wan's, and I never once got that impression. But if I'm being honest, I do have some problems with her character that are in line with the points I just mentioned. Moses Ingram doesn't always sell the dialogue she's given. She's able to figure out or accomplish things a little too easily, and some of her motivations are questionable once you learn her history. Like, was there really no other way for her to go after Vader besides working with the very people who slaughtered her family? Now, none of these writing problems are enough to ruin the entire show for me. I feel that the good outweighs the bad, but yeah, that stuff can be distracting. While I do feel that the show avoided a lot of the easy and lazy fan service that other Star Wars projects have succumbed to, it is still guilty of doing some of the same things. The biggest one for me is the Grand Inquisitor. I hate him in this show. That's not necessarily because he's a bad bad character or because the actor gives a bad performance. He's just a terrible live-action adaptation of the character. He doesn't look or sound nearly enough like he does in Star Wars Rebels, and he doesn't even look or sound enough like the live-action version of his species that we saw in Revenge of the Sith. To me, it's an example of lazy fan baiting. They throw in these characters from other Star Wars media because they know that it'll get the attention of someone like me, but then they don't actually put in the effort to adapting these elements well. This is similar to Black Chrysanthemum in the Book of Boba Fett. I've seen him in quite a few of the Marvel Star Wars comics, so I was initially very excited when he showed up, and I think they did a pretty good job of bringing him into live action. But then near the end of the episode where he's introduced, he and Boba Fett act like they don't really know each other, even though in Chrysanthemum's very first appearance, he was working alongside Boba Fett. It's like, how can you possibly get details like that wrong? While I do like most of what they did with Obi-Wan and Vader, you do kind of have to suspend your disbelief with certain parts of it. Like, it kind of makes Obi-Wan a hypocrite when he tells Luke that he has to confront and probably kill Darth Vader, considering that he's failed to do it a total of 3 times now. Again, I want to be clear that I feel the good outweighs the bad, but it's only fair to acknowledge what this series didn't do right. Despite the problems that I've talked about, and despite the fact that I was not excited at all going in, Obi-Wan Kenobi really surprised me. It was incredibly well made, had a genuinely good story for its main character, mostly did fan service the right way, and was a good bridge between the 2 trilogies. It honestly feels really good to be happy about Star Wars again. I was pretty much ready to give up on the franchise, but this series actually gave me hope that out of the millions of Star Wars shows that we're going to get, some of them might actually be good. I do understand why some fans don't like the show, and I certainly don't want to bash on anyone for being critical, but after seeing the series for myself, I honestly feel that a lot of the criticism was either exaggerated or just plain wrong. But of course that goes both ways. I'm sure many of you will completely disagree with what I'm saying, and that's fine. I think it's fitting that this is Obi-Wan's show because his quote from Return of the Jedi has never been more accurate.
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Well said. The fact that the series could reignite my love for Star Wars but do the exact opposite for other fans is just really fascinating to me. So again, my goal was neither to defend this series at all costs or rip it apart, but just to give as honest an analysis as I could. And despite some of its flaws, I truly do believe that this is the best live-action Star Wars content that we have gotten under Disney. I know that going forward, we are going to get plenty more Book of Boba Fett's, but for the first time in a while, I have hope that we'll get a few more Obi-Wan Kenobis. Only time will tell. After all,
you've got a ways to go.
so that's my review of Obi-Wan Kenobi. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. And now I want to hear from you guys. What did you think of Obi-Wan Kenobi? Do you agree with my take, or did this show just not work for you at all? Whatever it is, feel free to share your thoughts down below in the comments. And please, please be civil and respectful towards each other.
So uncivilized.
It's important for us to show that not every part of the Star Wars fandom is toxic. Well, time to bring this one to a close. Thanks again for watching, and may the Force be with you, always.